on Hindvani.
It's Thursday, the 7th of April, 2022, and you're listening to Hindvani. And if you're wondering, no, Ravash did not turn into a woman. It is I, Tamasha Khanyi, your favorite newsreader, and I'm taking over Hindvani this afternoon. We're going to be talking about a very pertinent issue. Dare I say, it is the talk of the ton. And that is, of course, Bridgerton. Drama from Shonda Rhimes is based on Julia Quinn's best-selling romance series. So today we're going to be talking to two lovely women, namely Roanna Moodley and Alyssa Pillay, who are both social media influencers. Alyssa Pillay is born and bred in Chatsworth, Durban. She is a digital agency owner and a Harvard Extension Master's candidate. She also describes herself as a fur mama of a 16-year-old poodle and an 18-month pit bull shepherd. So Roanna Moodley is a social media influencer known as dFrontRo, where she shares motivational, inspirational, and entertaining content, and she has built her reputation from being a talk show host and taking sensitive topics head-on by creating awareness and igniting positive change. She now uses social media as a means to continue her mission of motivating, inspiring, and helping people to live their best lives. Welcome to Hindvani, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Hi.
So, very interesting conversation. Before we dive in, I want us to just lay a foundation for our listeners. What is your understanding of representation and why is it important to us? Why should we care about it?
I think it's really, really important to see people that look like you and have similar physical features to you in mass media, such as print or TV or even movies. Simply because it celebrates it celebrates diversity at its best. And growing up, I didn't see people that I could aspire to be like. I was always pushed towards the way other people looked in terms of like blonde hair and blue eyes. That's very rare in Indian genetics. And growing up, it was I just felt the need to change all the time. And when I speak about representation to older women, such as my aunts and great aunts and even my mom, they don't seem to see an issue with the lack of representation because they're so brainwashed into thinking that beauty is anything but the way they look. And representation is important because if you get to see people that look like you would celebrate what you are made up of. And I think that's really, really important. It's not about division. It's about celebration of diversity. And that's the main thing about representation and why it's so important in mass media.
Absolutely. What are your views, Roanna?
I think representation, especially now in 2022, it's such a fundamental aspect. We South African people are supposed to be a country that is a rainbow nation, that is a country that has a diverse cultures and diverse people. And I think now, after coming through so many years from, Madiba's freedom, we really should be showcasing the different attributes of our different cultures and our races and the flavors that we have to offer. And I think that really is what representation is, just giving every kind of culture and race their bit to stand out.
I have to agree with that as well. I think a lot of people of color, so non-white people, will have that similar experience that you're talking about of just not being able to see themselves represented in the media spaces. But this goes beyond just, race. It's also just about gender as well. So, for example, Wonder Woman was huge for women, being represented as heroes.
It also shows that, we're all not cookie cutter types of people,
Exactly.
And yes, it's so important to see diversity and celebrate it as well.
So let's talk about season 2 of Bridgerton. It centers around the Sharma sisters, who are dark-skinned women from India. They're played by Simone Ashley and Charitha Chandra. This was a historic moment for all women of color around the world, I believe, because I think it's so great to see dark-skinned women as lead romantic roles. but particularly Indian women, of course. So how did it feel for you to watch this season?
Growing up, I'm so used to seeing Indian people being stereotyped in media. We always the funny geeky ones, or the awkward ones with the convenience store owners and the taxi drivers. And to see an Indian woman that actually looks like an Indian woman. The average Indian woman isn't always bleached on the face. To see someone, he literally said she was the bane of his existence, and to see someone that I could see a little bit of myself in physically, to be an object of desire. It was a change. It was a breath of fresh air. It was beautiful. She both the women that played the roles of the Sharma sisters, they played it perfectly. And in terms of representation of physical features of Indian women, everything was just so perfectly represented. Even though the show was based in colonial England, representation was rife throughout. Like, for example, the jewelry that they wore, they had like little bits of Indian jewelry. Like the show incorporated chai instead of English tea into the show, into the storyline.
Right.
There were examples of an Indian hardi ceremony that's done before a wedding, even though the wedding uh, was based in England. Indian traditions were celebrated instead of mocked or used as a joke. It was celebrated in the most beautiful way possible. Even music, like the music was incorporated in a classical way to go with the show's themes. Um, and it was celebrated in the most beautiful way. I couldn't fault uh, the way the writers and the creators of Bridgerton uh, represented Indian culture and Indian people as a whole in the show. It was absolutely perfect, in my opinion.
I think for every brown woman that watched the season two, we were just taken back to a time when, like, we were little girls and we never saw representation happening on television. And I was that little girl who thought, why is my hair so dark? Why can't it be lighter? Or why doesn't she look like me? Is there something wrong with my skin? So just seeing these women that were representing and that looked like me, that looked like my cousins and my sisters and some of the friends that I grew up with, that was just a powerful message to say that we've come this far. And what's nice also, being a millennial now and being a mom, we are able to now show our children and say, hey, there's people that look like you on TV, which is something we never grew up with.
Absolutely.
And what I really like about the show, I know a lot of Indian people were very particular, but they didn't use one Indian language to use terms of endearment. They tried to include a little bit more. So I don't know if you noticed, Kate called her little sister Bon.
Yeah.
And then also they referred to their dad as Appa, which means father in Tamil. So Indian languages were incorporated in different ways. Instead of just using one Indian language, they tried to celebrate as much as they could.
Right, that's so beautiful. So let's take it to India. Let's talk about Bollywood for a moment. I would say that I've watched enough Bollywood films to see how what I consider Eurocentric beauty standards have influenced the movies and the shows that come out of Bollywood. So like light-skinned women with small noses, you have to be slender, as a representation of worthiness, of love, affection, attention, even desirability, which of course isn't true. I see how that permeates into most of Hollywood and Bollywood stories. So do you think that Bollywood can learn a thing or two from this season of Bridgerton?
Absolutely. I think that if you really pay attention, you'd notice that at least 60% of Bollywood movies are remakes of Hollywood ones. And that's because most of Bollywood is brainwashed. Again, I use that term for a reason. People seem to think that Indian people want more of Eurocentric and Americentric standards,
right,
in terms of beauty and entertainment. And that's not necessarily the case. There's beautiful tales to be told from an Indian perspective, or even creatively, like the way the writers of Bridgerton wrote it into the show. There are many ways to incorporate Indian culture or any other culture, for that matter, without following a certain standard that is created by uh, America, or even Europe, for that matter. So I think that Bollywood just could really take a page or two from the second season of Bridgerton, and celebrate people not for what they think is right or what they think is beautiful, but for what beauty truly is, and that is representation and diversity.
Absolutely.
And embracing people for who they are.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, 15 years ago, I was in India, and I had the luxury and the opportunity to work with some amazing artists in India. And still at that time, some of the producers said to me that I needed to, use a little bit of fairing cream, and I needed to work on my features because I have a nose that's not, small enough for the industry. And that was like 15 years ago. And I think even looking at movies now, there's still predominantly very light-skinned women that are portrayed on most of the movies. So yes, I do think there is lessons to learn from a representation point, to know that light skin doesn't mean beautiful, but all skin means beautiful. And I think we really need to change the narrative. And if more of us make a noise about it and we speak about it, then we're also making a shift, and people will start pivoting their thought process, especially the future. There's a long way still to go. But with us just making that, noise about it on our social platforms, or on radio like this with you, we are creating that awareness, and hopefully, the right people listen and they take heed to that request.
Hindvani 91.5 FM.
To Yuvani on Hindvani, and I'm talking to Alyssa Pillay and Roanna Moodley about representation in the media.
Yuvani on Hindvani.
In honor of season 2 of Bridgerton, Netflix South Africa had an event that was hosted by former Miss SA Zozibini Dunzi. The theme was an African Bridgerton affair, and it drew a lot of criticism because of the lack of South African Indian celebrities that were present. And I want you to tell us more about that, because you were quite vocal about that on social media. And there was even an article that was written about that on ECR, or East Coast Radio, where they spoke about how you, as a KZN blogger, were vocal about that. Why did Netflix SA miss the mark with this event?
I think that they failed to recognize the PR team that was in charge of executing the event seemed to forget one very, very big fact. And that is South Africa has the largest Indian community outside of India. So I remember Trevor Noah making a joke once. He said that if India had to disappear, we would be like the South African Indians would be India. And I saw it. It was very strange. I noticed what was happening, and I kept waiting. I'm like, okay, maybe they just didn't release enough images yet. And then I started to like, I was really, really engrossed in the whole Bridgerton affair globally. And I noticed that all around the world, Netflix was hosting parties just like the African affair, and Indian culture was celebrated to the max. And I think that it was absolutely strange that Indians weren't not only not celebrated, but I think that there were only 2 or 3 Indian people, that South African Indian people, that were actually invited to the event. It was very, I found it very strange, very peculiar, considering that Bridgerton season 2 was about South Asian representation to the max.
Well, look, I think the event in itself was a beautiful event. Netflix SA usually does beautiful events. And what struck me as a little bit abnormal was that most of the people invited to this event were not a representation of who was acting in the season 2 of Bridgerton. So I would have wanted more brown people to have attended, perhaps seen them on stage, perhaps maybe even someone talking about some of the Marathi languages that was mentioned on Bridgerton. I mean, there's so many connotations. There were marigolds. There was a night before. Someone who comes from that background would have been able to explain that a little bit better to the audience. We could have depicted it. We could have put our own South African spin to it. I mean, if you know Durban has the largest amount of brown people outside of India. So we could have, said something about that, especially because we have so many brown people representing the country and contributing to our economy. So I think we missed the mark from that point. It doesn't mean that those people that were at the event didn't need to have a seat there. It just meant that we too should have been invited and had the opportunity to showcase why, the depiction was so important to us. And I think we missed the mark in that regard because we made it too African opposed to a juxtaposition of the two, like South African Indian, for example.
I read an article actually about this. So it was on Eyewitness News and it was titled A Bridgerton Affair That Forgot Its Indian Cast, and it was written by Thalia Ramkalawan. So she was essentially saying that the Netflix SA event was a complete erasure of the Indian experience in South Africa. She spoke about the history of Indians in the country, namely through colonization, but also how Indian culture is a huge part of the fabric of this country. What do you think is the solution going forward to prevent such a catastrophic erasure of, people's identity in this country?
I think that moving forward, PR teams, communication companies need to recognize that South African Indian people are a huge part of the, the population as a whole, as well as a driving force in the South African economy. And in order to push representation, including Indian people, well, I can't say Indian people, I mean specifically South African Indian people. We are very different from Indian people as a whole because many of us are third, fourth generation South African Indians. We were born here. Representation in South African Indians, of them, is so important. And simply because we are a huge part of the population, the fact that we are the largest community outside of India is enough to explain that. I think that moving forward, public relations teams really need to start including Indian celebrities and influential people in the community or nationally in these events. So people will actually understand that, okay, if we're hosting an event, South Africa is known to be the rainbow nation. I didn't feel that way looking at the pictures of the Bridgerton affair. Right. I didn't feel like a rainbow nation was represented correctly. And it just so happened that I am South African Indian and the show is about South Asia representation. But I could say the same thing for any other race group that's left out of an event. As a rainbow nation, if you're leaving out a whole race group, that is a problem. That is a huge problem. So moving forward, I think it's already done. Everything's done. You can't change it. But moving forward, having a guest list that represents the population as a whole when it comes to race, gender, age groups, I think that would be the best solution.
Look, I think you can't undo what has happened, but what I blinkers on to it boils down to just having your ear close to the ground and knowing what's around you and being cognizant of what the message and the call to action is. So, for example, the Bridgerton season 2 was really a call out to say that we're representing dark-skinned, brown people and it's okay and they're beautiful. And I think if that was the essence, then we could have showcased some of our beautiful brown people there. So I think in next events, it's just being more aware and taking heed to truly what is South African, which is our rainbow nation, and not only saying, okay, it's either black or it's either white. It's neither or. It's an array of colors that are involved, and no one should feel excluded, because we are South African and we love the fact that we can walk down the street and see such a beautiful rainbow nation and have these different relationships with people. And I think that's fundamentally where we should be shifting towards. And people really need to, even in the advertising space or in the media space, are we aware that we're all kind of, there's not so many people that are like this in other countries. And that's our unique selling point. So as much as we're proudly South African, we come with flavor. We've got mixed races, we've got different cultures. So just embracing that and being aware of what's going on the ground is vital, I think, for us not missing the mark going forward.
So lastly, we're going to end off on a very light note. I'm very interested to know what your Bridgerton name is. So how it works, and for the listeners, they're going to try this as well. How you do it is you add Lord or Lady. So that's the first part. Then your middle name.
Okay.
Then the last drink that you had, and add ton to the drink. Then the first part of your street name, and then you add Shire. So it's Shire. A lot of people say Shire. It's actually pronounced Shire. So I'm going to start at the time, because the last drink I had now was water. But at the time when I discovered how to make my Bridgerton name, I had Milo. So this is my name. Lady Nasipi Miloton of Hawkshire. And what's yours?
I think my middle name is actually Alyssa. So,
no fair.
Okay, but I'd use my first name for this exercise.
Yeah.
So I would be Lady Nicolene Waterton of 31st Shire.
Nice.
I love that. I also saw that trending online. Mine would be Lady Roanna of, what was the rule again? I can't remember. Lady Roanna of Patshire.
Okay. So I love
when I drank, you said, hey, no, Lady Roanna Coffeeton of Patshire.
Love it. I love that. Thank you so much for your input, ladies.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for using the platform as Hindvani to create awareness, and for us to have a platform so that we can spread the awareness. I do appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me and listening to my opinions about this particular topic.
As they should be. Thank you.
Hindvani 91.5 FM.
For the youth,